This morning I am in downtown Zionsville, and I'm going to answer, at least partially, one of the questions that I hear about Zionsville and Carmel quite often. So what are the big differences between the two? So we're going to get into 5 of those differences today in this video. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, I'm Jason Compton with Living in Indianapolis, crossing a street here right now. Welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here to the channel, welcome to you as well. So if you have questions about Zionsville or Carmel or any of the cities and towns that surround Indianapolis and Indianapolis itself, then make sure you reach out any way that you know how. We'll always have your back with those questions. We'll certainly have your back when it comes time for you to make your move anywhere in the Indy Metro. All right, so a super common question between Zionsville and Carmel. When you're researching the two, you can get into some obvious differences between Carmel and Zionsville, but we have to really dig in to figure out what some of the major differences are between the two and how one might be preferable over the other one for you. And in some cases, you might not really care between the two, and they're both exceptionally nice. This is definitely not a knock on either one at all. We're just trying to dig into some of those differences. So we're going to go through 5 in this video here, but there are of course more differences when you start to really parse things out, but I think these are some of the ones that might help in at least putting one in the category that is a little bit more preferred for you versus the other. So number 1 is the most obvious between the two, and the one that you can find out pretty much pretty easily. So it's the population. Carmel is much bigger than what Zionsville is. Carmel's a little over 100,000 people, and Zionsville is roughly 33,000 people or so. So that's a big difference in population when you're talking 3 times as large, at least 3 times as large as the other one. And for some, they may not care between the two. In fact, they share a border. The western side of Carmel is the eastern side of Zionsville. They do share that border, and there are a lot of cities and towns out there, not just around the Indy Metro, where you share a border with another city or town right next to you, and sometimes it's hard to tell that you're going from one to the other. That's not exactly the case with Zionsville. It is the case with a lot of others around Indianapolis, but Zionsville and Carmel, it's a little bit different. So the difference in population, once you start digging in, and if you're living there, I think you'll notice that difference in population. So of course, with that difference in population comes a difference in the schools. The schools at Carmel are certainly much bigger than what you have in Zionsville. That's one of the ways that you'll notice. But the big difference between the two with their population and the fact that they do share a border, but the border is a little bit goofy, and I'll get into that here in another point in just a few minutes, is number 2, the big difference because of that population difference between the two, is that in Zionsville, in general, you're just going to have a little less energy. So it's not like Carmel is this enormously poppin' place where it's just has thousands and thousands of people running around the streets and tons of cars. There are quite a few people, that's for sure. There are quite a few cars out there. The traffic is not dramatic. I don't really care what anybody says. I mean, bad traffic, you can find it occasionally in a couple little spots at Carmel, only during certain times, and that would be really quite rare. Almost anywhere you go in Carmel, even though there are a lot of cars, there are a lot of people, the traffic really moves. It does not take that long or that much longer for, let's say, a 10-minute trip if the traffic is a little heavier. It might take you 11 minutes versus 10 minutes. It's just not that bad. But in Zionsville, there are fewer people, fewer cars, a little less energy because of that. And another thing that kind of dials that energy down is that you have less transient traffic. So Carmel, just where it's located in the north side of Indianapolis, You have people that travel through Carmel to get to Westfield, or a lot of other places to the north of Indianapolis. And then you've got people coming, let's say from Zionsville through Carmel, or from Fishers and Noblesville through Carmel. Carmel is buried right there between Westfield, Noblesville, Fishers, Indianapolis, and Zionsville. And so you have a lot of situations where people are traveling through it. When you get to this particular part, it's not really that way. There's not a tremendous amount of transient traffic through Zionsville. You might have some people coming from Indianapolis to, let's say, Lebanon, or on their way to Chicago, or from Chicago or Lebanon, Indiana, down to Indianapolis, or even to Zionsville, something like that, but they're usually gonna be taking I-65. And traveling through a city or through any town on an interstate, I'm not sure that really even counts. They might get off occasionally that interstate and visit someplace, but usually it's a gas station or a restaurant right off the interstate, and it doesn't really get into the heart of whatever city, town we're talking about. So less transient traffic and just less populated overall dials it down a little bit. And I think just I'm kind of walking around on Main Street here in downtown Zionsville this morning, it's a pretty good illustration, I think, of the general tone that you're going to have in a place like Zionsville. There's enough going on for sure to live in Zionsville and really go no place else. You don't have to. Zionsville has everything that you're going to need on a daily basis. So nearby, you're gonna have the Lowe's, the Home Depot, the Target, grocery stores, things like that. And even if you had to travel outside of Zionsville to do that, it would just be on the border, the absolute edge of Zionsville in order to do that. So an example would be 421 on the eastern part of Zionsville, the eastern border. So that is where it shares with Carmel. There are a lot of Carmel addresses right along 421, and you get some Zionsville addresses too. The border's a little bit goofy, but 421, we usually generally think about it being the border. You know, you're gonna find everything that you could ever need there. And then on the western side of Zionsville, off Whitestown Parkway, you're gonna find a lot of what you would ever need there too. But in Zionsville proper, right in the center, like here along Main Street, you'll find less. You'll find more unique things, but you'll still find things that you can use on a daily basis, including grocery store, things like that, which is what most people are usually concerned about. They don't want to have to travel 20 or 30 minutes just to get a few groceries for the week. That starts to be a little bit painful. So it's just a little less busy. That's about the best that I can describe it. And this right here, just this Main Street, just kind of the lower key feel. If you were here on a Saturday morning or something with the farmer's market going on in nearby Lions Park, it's certainly gonna look busier, but late morning, during the week, it's just not all that traffic. Weekend, without the farmer's market, you're gonna have more people walking up and down the street, but that's not gonna be how it is throughout all of Zionsville. It's just not gonna have quite as much traffic or as many people as what you're gonna have in Carmel. So I mentioned that border of Carmel and Zionsville, the eastern border of Zionsville and the western border of Carmel. So you have that border between the two, and then the way you look at Carmel, at least the way that it's laid out, the way that it's planned, is very, very different than what you have in Zionsville. This is probably, other than the population, one of the more obvious differences that you can see between the two. You can physically see it on a map, how just the city planning is. And I think you have to kind of get on a map here to show you what those differences look like. So let's take a look at that. So here's what we're talking about with the city planning. Now you can generally see where Zionsville is, although it actually, on the Google map here, but it's actually much bigger than that. It extends over here. You can have Zionsville addresses up here, outside of this red, and even down in this area too. And 421 is the general border that we say exists between Carmel, which is over here in this location, and then Zionsville is over here on this location. But it does zigzag back across this, so it's not exactly perfect on the border between the two, but it's nice to at least think about that. So if we're looking at the city planning though, and just how they're laid out. I think this is probably fairly telling. You can see all of these east-west roads, 146, 141st, 131st, which is Main Street, 116th, and there's even 126th in here, although it starts to get a little bit goofy in through downtown, and it doesn't really go all the way through the west part of Carmel. 106th, and you can even get down here to the border of Indianapolis and Carmel at 96th. And then all of these north-south streets, got some major ones in US 31 and Keystone. You have Gray Road over here, you have Hazeldale, you have Clay Center Road there in the center, which is actually almost an extension of Ditch Road. You have Town, you have Shelbourne. It's like a grid for the most part in Carmel. But you come over here to Zionsville, and it is just not really that way at all. So we get rid of these lines real quick, and we go over here to Zionsville, and you can see here's downtown Zionsville where I'm shooting this video, right there along Main Street. But 116th becomes Sycamore, and it winds down into downtown Zionsville and becomes Oak Street, all the way back over here to I-65. And then when you're at 131st, which is Main Street through Carmel, actually just goes across 421 and becomes Willow Road, which you can take then all the way down here to Elm and into downtown Zionsville. You have 121st Street, which dead ends essentially here into Elm Street. You can see that it doesn't extend any further than that, and you have to turn. So there's not just a lot of perfect north, south, east, west roads going through Zionsville, and it gives it just obviously a different look on a map, but certainly a different feel to it altogether. So after looking at it on the map and just realizing that you can't really get to Zionsville from Carmel absolutely as direct as you can from some of the other cities and suburbs that surrounded or in the area, like you can from Indianapolis to Carmel. Sometimes you're not even going to know that you're crossing from one to the other. And here's what I mean by that, when you don't know you're crossing from one to the other. Sometimes you really don't. Let's say you're going north on Ditch Road from Indianapolis across 465 and into Carmel. Sometimes you wouldn't know that you've crossed in there unless you've seen a sign, and you will see signs that you're going from Indianapolis into Carmel. If you're going, let's say, from just Westfield up here in this particular area, and get a little drawing on here for you. So Westfield up here, and you're going south into Carmel, you're not going to know it unless you see a sign. And again, you probably will see a sign. If you're going along 146th Street, which is this road right here, this line's not very straight, but if you're going along 146th and you go from Carmel into Noblesville, you're not going to know that you really have. They're all just extremely connected. The biggest difference between, let's say, Carmel and Fishers. So we've got Carmel on this side over here of the White River and Fishers over here on this side of the White River, and you can see the White River snaking through here. You have to cross that on a bridge, but honestly the bridges aren't anything significant, and if you close your eyes you'll never know that you really crossed a river sometimes. The White River's not really all that big. And it's the same with Westfield over here in this area, and then Noblesville over here in this area. You got to cross the White River to do that, and also to get into from Carmel over into Noblesville, or Noblesville into Carmel. You got to do that, but you won't really know it necessarily that you're doing that. So they all feel at times like they all have different personalities for sure. Noblesville, Westfield, Carmel, and Fishers. But you may not notice the difference when they're blending together like this. Over here with Zionsville, because it's just a less direct way to get into it, you don't just have those east-west roads, north-south roads.
it gives it a little bit more of an exclusive feel, just because of that geographic, not really isolation per se, but isolation. You have to really purposely go from Carmel over into Zionsville just to get across into downtown Zionsville, or really anywhere over here in this western part. There's not a tremendously direct way to do that. I mean, sometimes if we're over here in Carmel, let's say in the central part of Carmel, if you look at the GPS and you have to get somewhere, let's in this circle, sometimes the most direct or the fastest way is to take the interstate. So it'll tell you to go down 31 and take the interstate, maybe over here to Whitestown Parkway, and then this direction, which sometimes gets you going out of the way, but it's just a less time-consuming way because there's not a tremendous number of options just going right through. So Zionsville is connected, certainly to Carmel. It's connected even in a way to Whitestown, and up here you start to get into a mix between Zionsville and Westfield in a lot of these areas. But the fact that it just feels like it's a little bit more over there adds that exclusivity and that slight isolation feel to it, even though it's not totally isolated at all from any other places. It just gives you that air that it is a little bit.
All right, that last point. When you look at Zionsville, big difference between Carmel and Zionsville isn't necessarily in the average price point. So Carmel, Zionsville are both the two most expensive cities, Zionsville is actually a town, around Indianapolis to get into. So if you're looking though at homes in Zionsville and Carmel, there are almost always going to be fewer homes in Zionsville to choose from. That's just a population thing. You know, when you're talking 3 times as large in Carmel, there's definitely going to be more listings in there. But when you start to look at specific price points, when you start to narrow down a price range, and everybody has a price range for sure, there are just fewer, you could say entry level or first time home buyer opportunity type places in Zionsville. So if you were looking to stay under 400,000, something like that, that's difficult in Carmel. Definitely, you're not going to have a tremendous number of opportunities to get into Carmel under 400,000. You might have some townhomes, some condos. That would be certainly more numerous than single family homes. You get a few single family homes here and there, but if you're looking under 400 in Zionsville, it's not like it's not going to happen, but it's extremely rare. If you're looking under 500,000, I think you can probably see the exact same thing between Carmel and Zionsville. So there you have it. There are 5 points that make up the differences between Zionsville, Carmel. There are certainly more. Those are just a couple of the obvious ones and a few that take a little bit more research to try to figure out, if not living there for a little while. So if you have questions about Zionsville or the differences, any more differences between Zionsville and Carmel, make sure that you reach out any way that you know how, and we'll catch you in the next one.